Rose Ayling-Ellis was a great supporting character in this episode as Alice Fenley, and we also have the whole thing of Alice being deaf and using sign language and subtitles, which I thought was a fun inclusion to this episode. I think this was a good addition to the story and a great bit of inclusivity, as it doesn't feel like Alice being deaf is the focus of the story. Alice just happens to be deaf, and it still affects the story by making everything more difficult to deal with, but it isn't the focus of the story, which I really appreciated. And obviously, the Midnight Entity returns in this episode, and even though I was 90% sure this was going to be a sequel to Midnight before watching it because it leaked before, that reveal still really worked for me personally. I thought it was done really well, and it was giving me similar vibes to when I first watched The Legend of Ruby Sunday and they had the Sutekh twist at the end, which obviously Empire of Death didn't quite land for me as much, but that initial reveal at the end of Legend of Ruby Sunday really worked for me, and this was very similar in this episode. Now, I was worried about the Midnight Entity returning. My original speculation from that last shot of the Next Time trailer we got last week made me think that we were going to see the Midnight Entity doing the same thing again, because that shot looked very similar to when the 10th Doctor was possessed by the Midnight Entity in Midnight. So I was worried that the Midnight Entity would just act the same as before, just in a different location, but luckily they did something different with it in this episode. Likely because, at least from what RTD suggests in Unleashed, this wasn't originally intended to be a Midnight sequel when it was first written. It seems like originally this episode was likely written as a completely original monster by Sharma Angel Warfall, but then RTD realised it could suit the Midnight Entity and rewrote some of the parts for it to fit that, hence why he has a co-writing credit in this instead of it just being written by him or just being written by Sharma Angel Warfall. Although that does make me think how much of this was written by Russell, because I would have assumed that this episode was mostly written by Sharma and that Russell just came in to add some of the Midnight stuff, but I do believe he had top billing for writing credits in this episode, so maybe he ended up rewriting most of the story. I'm not really sure. But personally, I think this still works for me as it fits with what the Midnight Entity would do, but it's just messing with them in a different way to what it did before. I'm glad they also didn't show us what it looked like or reveal too much about it. Obviously, if you pause it at the right moments, or if you watched Unleashed, you can basically see what the Midnight Entity does look like in this episode. But for the episode itself, it does really work. And like Russell said in Unleashed, if you're going to do a sequel to any story, it shouldn't be Midnight, because you could easily mess it up and taint the original story, like they did with Pyramids of Mars last year. But luckily, I think they did this really well and pulled it off. Also, unless I'm understanding the mechanics wrong, there is a moment where Alice does a full 360 when she's saying "I'm clean" to the rest of the troopers, which I would have thought would have killed everyone following the rules of this monster. But like I say, maybe I'm misunderstanding the mechanics of this monster. Maybe she has to stand still for a little bit for it to work, or maybe it was just an in-the-moment acting decision that they didn't really pick up on. Also, the line, "If it was a clock face, you die at midnight," was a little bit too on the nose for me personally, but I know it worked for a lot of people.